Welcome to the Data Science Hangout. If you're joining for the first time, it's great to meet you. I'm Rachel, I'm the host of the Hangout. If this is your first Hangout, this is an open space for the whole data science community to connect and chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, what's going on in the world of data science. And so we want this to be a space where everybody can participate and we can hear from everyone. So there's 3 ways you can ask questions. You can always jump in live and just raise your hand on Zoom. That seems to be the easiest way. You could also put questions in the Zoom chat and just put a little star there if you want me to ask the question out loud, if you're maybe like in a coffee shop or something. And then we also have a Slido link where you can ask anonymous questions. And so Tyler or Rob will share that in just a second here. Just want to reiterate, we love to hear from everyone, no matter your level of experience too, or the industry that you work in. But I'm so happy to be joined by my co-host for today, Joe Gibson. Joe is a senior project director at the Beaumont Foundation and former director of epidemiology at Marion County Public Health Department. And Joe, I'd love to have you jump in here and introduce yourself and maybe share a little bit about your role in the foundation.
Sure. So I've been at Beaumont just since December, so it's not that long. We're working on a really interesting project to develop health-centered local data ecosystems that already exist all over the place. I mean, there's already health data at any location that gets used by different people for different purposes, but try to develop those so that they're more focused on equity and anti-racism, with a lot of community engagement to guide the use of that data, especially engagement by communities that are generally marginalized. So try to focus the use of that data toward identifying structural racism and addressing issues of structural racism, bring the data more to bear on those issues. So anyway, that's what I'm doing at the Beaumont, and I'm just kind of informatics advisor as well there. But I've spent 18 years as Indianapolis's epidemiology program director within the Marion County Public Health Department, and been very involved nationally in trying to improve public health informatics, essentially. A lot of partnership with healthcare informatics. We've got the Regan Street Institute here in Indianapolis, which is we're a leader in terms of clinical informatics.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks for all that you're doing in this space too. I know I actually was introduced to you by Jennifer, who comes to the Hangout quite a bit, and she had let me know how you had grown the team from 1 to 17 epidemiologists back when you worked together at the Public Health Department, and love to just kind of hear a little bit about how you did that and your journey in doing so.
And a lot of the credit goes to our director. She really values data. And I came in, I'm just a data geek. There were 4 people in the group. And I just started organizing our data sets into a central area, trying to link data together and trying to amass more data and organize it so we could be very responsive to any sort of data requests that came through from the director, from all our community partners, in public health only works through partnerships. So there's all sorts of people in the community who are concerned with health and or trying to get grants to improve health clinics, a hunger network, all sorts of groups like that. So we tried to set up systems so we could really quickly respond to their needs. And so we were able to use mainly SAS, and then we got into R to organize the data sets and present the data out to the community, and then partner with a lot of other local sort of data-oriented organizations where we could give them data and they could create interfaces to it as well. Just over time, just by being valuable, by pulling in more grants, the group slowly grew. I was there 18 years, so the growth from about 4 to about 20 was over 18 years. About half of that was through grants, and about half of that was through general fund from the health department because we were valuable.
That's awesome. What was that process like of getting people on board to use SAS and then R?
It was interesting. It's always so hard when you hire somebody to really have a good assessment of their skills, and we were constantly trying to figure out how to assess skills as we hired people. We'd have various, at first it was around SaaS. And so we had sort of this question about people's experience and skills in SaaS. And we'd ask them to do specific tasks around SaaS. And I remember somebody who did really well on the quiz, but turned out not to just sort of have a mind for doing the programming, and other folks who didn't especially do well on those quizzes and just grokked to the programming and were able to do amazing things. So never really cracked that nut, but always had a lot of support within the group. So we tried to create a really open environment where people were expected to ask for help from other people. That nobody was working on your own was not a good thing. We had to balance that with some people just wanting to sort of learning by discovering themselves, but I really tried to push people to ask questions. And we set up systems where everybody's code got reviewed by somebody else in the group, which was, in part, it was a quality check, but more, it probably provided value by helping people see different approaches to coding. So somebody took one approach and somebody else comes in and they go, oh, I'm learning something from your code. Or they're looking at code that could be improved and they're teaching somebody how to improve it. So just a validation process we had for any work products being produced. The code had to be audited. We called it a code audit by somebody else. That was a really good learning tool within the group to bring people along in their programming. And then we tried to have an environment where people could just go, we'll encourage people to innovate and take chances and create things. And it's, it was okay to make mistakes, but it wasn't okay not to try things.
It sounds like a great culture on the team, just being able to go ask everyone questions too. And I wonder how that differs with being in person and being able to work together versus now like working virtually too, or work some people in different locations.
There are good and bad things about it, but I think we actually were more effective when we went virtual. We used WebEx Teams for chat, but everybody's got some sort of chat tool, and that actually increased a lot of the interactions that we had with people because it was so easy to quickly send a message to somebody else about something. So net, it was kind of a good thing. There's still a lot of challenges in sort of establishing the relationships, especially when you hire new people. And it was all virtual to really make somebody feel like they're part of the team. We couldn't have lunches together, which was always the highlight of the day.
Yeah. Sometimes I struggle with knowing like when it's okay to ask people questions like virtually, like through Slack, because I feel like I'm just like, I don't know, interrupting people, which I am, but knowing what's the best way to do that too.
Yeah, we had a couple of discussions in our staff meetings around that. What will be our protocol? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? To try to encourage a reasonable amount of communication without people feeling imposed upon. So we set some standards there.
I see there's an anonymous question that came in that says, did you have to deal with any mistrust of open source tools when switching from SaaS to R?
Not really. We had a lot of autonomy in terms of what tools we decided to use. So yeah, IT really didn't challenge that much. So I would say no.
I might dig into this a bit deeper because I was just on a call yesterday with 3 people who were having struggles with convincing IT or just like bringing open source tools to IT. How did you introduce it to them?
Oh, we just asked for it. I mean, but we only got heavily into R. We got very heavily into R during the COVID pandemic, just early on in that, because the visualization interface was just a lot easier for us to work with in SaaS and to expand upon. But we'd started dabbling in R just like 5 or 7 years ago. And by that point, our IT group, which is a great group, really a lot of forward-thinking people in it, was pretty open already to open source. So there really wasn't a lot of question. We said, this is something we need. They said, okay, we'll set it up. They weren't
That's
happy.
great.
They wanted to stay on Windows systems. So,
Yeah.
we didn't get to use some of the Linux stuff, which might have made some things easier, except that they just wanted one OS to maintain.
Yeah. Well, I hope everybody has that good of an experience too.
We had a great IT group.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate in that.
That's great. Does anybody have questions about that, or is like experiencing this right now?
Rachel, I can chat about that, but I don't want to monopolize anything. We're going through it constantly, and we're in our So like I feel the pain of where the question has come from. I've had it in many places, and we're doing it now. And it just tomorrow I have a architectural review board. Why are you considering using R for pipelines into GCP?
Mm-hmm.
Just like those questions, because IT don't understand, right? Like, how is a stats language a thing to do stuff with data pipelines?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of education. Right? Like people think of R. Sorry if I say this, but sorry, not sorry. It's 1985 R. Well, it's moved on a little bit since I know the language. It was created in the early 90s, but like they think of it as that time frame. It's not the same anymore.
Yeah, it sounds like it can be so different across the board depending on the industry that you're in, or just the company itself. Javier, I see you had your hand raised too, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to add at my last company, this was like a fairly regular conversation because there was a cohort of kind of your classical statisticians that were just very comfortable doing their work in SAS. And we got around that. I mean, they still used SAS to a certain extent, but having like very tailored walkthroughs of things you can do with R for like very specific teams. So like, hey, let's look at your workflow right now and let's see how we could do this in R. That always seemed to really impress, especially when you kind of wrapped it around R Markdown or something to like, very quickly and cleanly present your data. So yeah, I think just having these one-on-one kind of smaller trainings with these groups of SAS users, like here's how you do it in SAS, let me show you how you could do it in R. I think that goes a long way.
Definitely.
Yeah, we trying to get people into R. We did some of that stuff as well. And it was just spotty whether people would pick up on it. With each of our ETHs is pretty independent in their programming. I mean, we have those code-outs and stuff, but in terms of their assignments, they can choose what they want to use for what they're doing. And it was hard to get people to dig in to a new system because it's easy to use what you know. But once we did, some people really took to it.
On that topic too, I see Ethan, you just asked a question as well about when you have people using different tools. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So just want to ask that within your team, you mentioned that people use both SAS and R. You have situations where some people are really into SAS and people are really into R. How do you manage, considering you also code reviewing each other? Because this is speaking from my experience that I have colleagues, we use not SAS, but SPSS, but we have people who have 10, 20 years of experience doing SPSS, and it's difficult to teach old new tricks. So it's difficult to get people to switch on to new stuff.
Yeah, and that would come down to who you choose to do your code review. So we had a system where you kind of rotate through everybody, but if it's going to be some complicated piece of R, then there's just a limited number of people who are going to do it. Same with SAS. I mean, we had people use SAS, but we didn't have a whole lot of people who were super experts in SAS. So it just came down to who was going to be doing the code review there. Again, though, it was a great opportunity for discovery and for people to see what was possible. So I think again about COVID, about we created a dashboard, which I brag about how great the functionality was and how it looked, but we weren't expert enough to actually create a dashboard that would load quickly. So it takes like 30 seconds to load, and then it's amazing. But when people saw what was possible, it would get them excited. And then if you could show them how simple it was to add a new graph or something, that could get them engaged as well.
I see there was another anonymous question too that was, can Joe and or other people on the call too give an example or two of guidelines they have as far as, sorry, just trying to read this question, as far as questions using chat now that we are virtual? Was that helpful? And if anyone has other context to add to that question, please put it in the chat too. But I think it's just around like guidelines that you mentioned for like slacking people with questions now that we're all virtual.
Right. And just to, if I can, I'll try to remember what our guidelines were, but they were essentially first text somebody, don't call them, don't do a voice call, first text them to see if they're available. And then do a voice call, and you call them if they don't respond, depending on the urgency or not. And we'd use email for anything that needs to have a long-term record. You do it in email because that's the only place that we had long-term records. But to prefer for quick communication to use a Slack chat or a WebEx chat, and that was to be used at any time. And people should at least acknowledge, at least respond when they've seen it, so you know that somebody's seen it. That was about the extent of our guidance as I remember it.
Yeah, we've been talking about it a lot here at RStudio to, like, when you put a message into a channel that has a bunch of people, like everybody then starts to like try and answer the question, instead of if it's just like targeted at one person or the specific people that need to see it. So we're working on that now.
That was another mistake I made early in the pandemic, was when we switched to started using WebEx chat. I said, okay, there's a bunch of joking. I was like, okay, well, let's use this channel to get work done. And then after about a month, I was like, boy, that was a mistake. We got to have a channel where we're talking to each other. We're all remote. We got to have some social interaction here.
Yeah. Angela, I see you had asked a question in the chat earlier about using RStudio Cloud, but I'm curious to just hear some more context of how you might use it.
Yeah, so I should probably do a little bit of an introduction. Thanks for the welcomingness to like whatever scale or whatever amount of work we do with this. So I am the water resources planner for Penobscot Indian Nation in what is Central Maine. And so we've been using R for a long time to do a variety of things, but I also work with a group, a Tribal Exchange Network group, which we just deal with we help tribes all across the country doing environmental monitoring, help process their data. And the reason I asked about RStudio Cloud is for a variety of reasons. Anytime we do training, it's a real hassle to get everybody set up, and there's inevitably problems in any session. And then when people go back, frankly, just what you guys were talking about, IT issues, it can just be such a pain. And I just didn't know if anybody had any experience. I haven't looked into it enough, whether you can have data hosted locally and use RStudio to ingest it, or whether your data has to be online. I mean, there's so many questions, but I really feel like it might be a solution for a lot of tribes. Mind you, we have to have internet connection, which is not always the case, especially up in Alaska. But I guess I'm trying to figure out how we can help train people, but also how we can help have people something easier when they go home, that they don't have to call us up and go, this isn't working. So any thoughts would be great.
I know, there you go.
Just say we didn't use RStudio Cloud, but we've used a lot of online trainings that are fairly self-contained that have been really useful. Just, our markdown stuff and with available data sets that people just import and then use on their own systems.
There's a lot of webinars that I can share with you, Angela, about like getting started with RStudio Cloud if you do want to try it out too, for other people that have used it for trainings. But I know that's like a huge benefit, is that everybody has the environment already set up with the packages that they need. So if it's someone brand new to using R, they don't kind of get stuck in, how do I even install this thing?
Yeah. That's what we're running into. So if you could send me stuff, that would be great, Rachel. That's
Awesome.
really the biggest problem is most of the folks, not everybody, but most of the folks we are trading and working with haven't done much coding at all. And so they're really starting off in the beginning. And I love R. My boss has actually asked if maybe I would get R to make a cup of coffee for me someday. So I've told them that that's my goal, but not everybody has that level of addiction, I guess. So it's really can be like almost like, oh, I don't want to use R because I can't deal with the complications. And I'm interested. I can't remember who it was that said, I think it was Brian that said you could you have some hacks for installing it if you don't have administrative privileges. I mean, that's the first level, and then all the other like upgrading versions of R, it's just can be a little bit daunting. So thanks.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the question. And Mike, I might put you on the spot here because it sounds like you have experience doing that. I see you put it's brilliant for training.
Yeah. So I've used it internally for doing training with colleagues. Just as you say, even with the best will in the world and a lot of lead time, if you rely on individuals installing R and installing packages, you're going to get a whole mess of different versions, different package versions, different package sets. Guaranteed you'll spend half of the training time ironing out, why this isn't working for a certain individual because who knows what, Whereas if you pop open RStudio Cloud, as you're saying, Rachel, like you can set it up so that you guarantee everyone's got the same packages, versions, sets ready to go, and it just cuts out that whole, now, why are you seeing this not working for you? I have to say that we had a few issues with it when I was being a classroom assistant in the Tidyverse training at RStudio conference in 2020. I think that was just, that was almost a glitch. Something in behind the scenes wasn't working just as it should on that occasion. So it was causing a little bit of glitchiness. But even then, it's by far the easiest way of just ensuring that everyone's seeing the same things and working off the same basis.
Awesome. On that topic of training too, I see there was an anonymous question. What are a few starter packages or skills for teams that are transitioning languages? And I think, Joe, this might be a bit on SAS to R too.
Yeah, we so we had an epi group. We had whatever 15 to the number of people and varied, but we had good control over that environment. And so we had everybody installing the same version, and we really pushed everyone to be using Tidyverse packages as much as possible. Because my big concern with R is that there are so many packages. If we've got people doing code audits for each other, I don't want to have everyone have to learn everyone else's idiosyncratic favorite package. So we tried to have a lot of push toward using the same set of packages, and Tidyverse is really nice and comprehensive and such. And we're into the graphics a lot as well. So a lot of ggplot2 code. So I don't know, that's how we dealt with the package and the different environment issue. And again, it was just one group, so we're mainly just training that. We worked with the state health department to get them trained in R2, and they helped us, and we did some sharing there. In terms of the transition from SAS, though, we never really had a wonderful training solution. We just had people from the group put together trainings and present it, or find trainings online and present those to the group. And again, it was here's an example of how you do it in SAS, here's how you do it in R, even some books that showed that sort of thing. Just people going through examples or the one-on-one code audit kind of trainings that we did. No great solutions there from us.
Thanks, Joe. There's a few other anonymous questions too, but again, feel free to jump in live into the conversation if you want to just raise your hand on Zoom too. But one of the questions was, how do you manage a team where there are different preferences for languages?
So we stayed very organized in our code. any work product that got produced had to have code that was archived, that went into a repository, and it got changed, that changes went into the repository. So we had a lot of controls, so we could always do what I call a data audit. Any work product that we produced over the 18 years I was there, you could take that work product, there'd be an identifier on it, and you could track that back to the code that produced that data thing. So if there's a problem with it, we could figure out what the problem was. Or if you wanted to reproduce it, you could find the source code and you could update that and use that code again. So we had, I've lost track of the question, I'm sorry.
It was just around managing the team where there's different preferences.
So we sort of we built this code library that had a foundation in sort of evolving code for different functions that we often did. By the time I left there were thousands of programs in this library, but they were tracked in a database and you could search it and you could find useful code. And it didn't really matter if you used SAS or R. It was just to get the work done. I mean, I didn't really care. I really wanted the group to move toward R. I was kind of hoping long-term we could bounce off of SAS and maybe even get to like just having a Python R environment, just to get to free programs that we could share with other public health agencies and sort of move the whole public health informatics world forward by being able to share code more freely and not be limited by some of the costs involved with SAS. But I didn't care if people used R or SAS, and we created code that would allow people to call R from SAS or SAS from R to try to go back between the two. And we had a lot of model code for using the two of them together to take advantage of some of our graphics and some of the SAS data management. But we didn't have rules about it, and we didn't have like an FDA breathing down our necks to say you have to conform to this or that. We were free to do whatever we decided the standards would be.
For sure. I know something you're especially passionate about is improving the public health system. And I'm curious if there's ways that we as a community can come together to help do that, or what ideas you have for doing this.
There's some exciting stuff going on in public health informatics around R, around just open source data sharing. They're kind of one-off initiatives for the most part, but there are folks who are, have GitHub sites where they're sharing their code. There are some communities of practice. There's one around, they call it syndromic surveillance, but essentially looking at emergency department data. There's a national system, and there's a lot of local systems that pull in emergency department data and look at it for emergencies that are occurring, or suddenly there's a bunch of this disease or that disease. We're tracking COVID. There's all sorts of very useful things you can do in emergency department data to get a more real-time picture of what's going on in your community. And there's a community of practice around that, and the community of practice has a group within it that's doing a lot of sharing of R code for analyzing this data and some kind of standards for it. And there's a unified national platform that has some of the data, and they're sharing R code for going up to that platform and analyzing your locker of data from that, and sessions about how to. I mean, it's so I guess I see the opportunities. There's exciting stuff going on. How this community might help is just participating in a community of practice. They work because people engage in them. I mean, you guys have one right here. So being engaged in a community of practice, supporting it, moving into getting very involved and helping to move things forward, lead things, to take initiative and really get engaged. I've got to say, my own career really comes, I am where I am now because of communities of practice. I started in public health, back when people wrote with chisels and stones, but I evolved to where I am now, which is I'm very involved nationally in a lot of stuff because of communities of practice. By it's sort of a duocracy. The people who do come into power, you get engaged, you see what has to happen, you try to move it forward, you work with other people to make things happen, and you build things. A lot of them fail and some of them don't work, but you create a network that helps improve things.
That's great. They have that community too. We've been trying to help start some communities of practice. So for example, like for supply chain and I wonder how do they start that and then move it forward so that it's actually progressing? And if it, like, did you, I don't know, just interested
So-
to hear how it started and how it progressed.
I've been involved in trying to start communities of practice that just fizzled, and others that didn't. And you know, some of them take, some of them did. The big one I think of that fizzled is because it was sort of attached to a research initiative that the CDC had. But suddenly the funding got pulled from it, and so we were sort of the practice engine, or the practice appendage that was attached to this sort of research community, research funded project, and that went away, and so the appendage just sort of faded. And that'll happen. You know, life is full of risks, and you invest, and sometimes it doesn't pay off. It's got to be around something that people care enough to spend time doing. There's got to be some immediate payoff to people, and I just, in my experience, I'm thinking about the National Public Health Association and work groups that we've had there. It's got to be something people care about, but you've got to have enough. You've got to have a couple of people who are spending a lot of their time thinking about the community and how to make the community work and how to engage the community. I mean, I think, Rachel, you probably have this role within this group of how do I do something that these people care about and bring them together so that they get value out of the time, so they're willing to come next week to do this again. And then relationships start to happen because people start to meet and talk to each other, and side projects start to build out of that. And some of those fade and some of those are successful. There's value that comes out of that, and it can grow, but you really have to have the gardener. You have to have the person cultivating it, or the several people cultivating it, really to create enough of a payoff kind of socially and value in terms of work that it moves forward. And that only happens because people take a risk of investing their time in it. Somebody's got to gamble and put in that effort.
Definitely. That's really helpful, Joe. I see, Vin, you asked about this community as well, and how you can find community of practice. Would you want to jump in here? Or I can read it if you want to add.
Yeah,
oh, there you go.
Sorry, I'm like in a busy area.
Oh, no worries. I
sorry
can
about
read
the
it
noise.
if you want. So the question was, Joe, I'm an epidemiologist in a local health department using R. How can I find or join that community of practice you mentioned that's sharing code for public health related data?
Sure. That would, if you look up the CDC NSSP, National Syndromic Surveillance Program, I think it's called. You should be able to, if you search for that and syndromic surveillance, you should be able to find some community of practice. Jen, who works at the health department I was at, maybe you could help get connected as well. I think Freshta probably has a connection, the information for that community, how to get tied into that.
Awesome. Yeah, Jen, if you don't mind sharing that in the chat, that would be helpful too. Or somebody maybe already did.
You might also just, if you look on GitHub for Harold Gill, HAROLD GIL, he's got a GitHub site. He's doing some really great stuff out in Washington State with the group out there, and he can probably help you get plugged in. Or go to NACHO, the National Association of City and County Health Officials, and get involved in one of the work groups there. Get involved in the EPI group or the informatics group, and you can get networked that way and start making things happen. NACCHO.
Awesome. Thank you. Stephanie, I see you also asked a great question in the chat if you want to jump in.
Hi, this is Stephanie, right?
Yes, that's Stephanie.
Okay. Oh yeah, so I was really interested in how you were talking about, Joe, the code archive database you were mentioning, like tracking everything, because we've done a variety of things at different places I've worked, and none of them have been like particularly user friendly.
Yeah, and this is as user friendly as we've gotten. It still requires that each time that you create a work product that you log it into this database. So that's the trick, making sure that people log it. So when you start a work project, you go to the database, it creates a new ID for that work project. You put in a title, you put in just some basic information about the purpose of it. It's not, there's only like 5 fields you have to fill in. And then you hit a button, it creates a folder for it. It kind of does some background setup to make things easier for you. And then you can store your stuff within the structure we've got on our network that allows people to find things easily and is based on that ID. And then that ID, you're responsible for putting that ID on any work product or within the name of the files that you create associated with this. I'm not being really clear about that, but essentially the core of it is there's an ID that's generated every time you do a work product. That ID is the first thing in all the file names associated with that work product for the most part. Sometimes you have to put it at the end because you want other people who aren't techies to read it. And it goes into a folder that's in a structure where it makes it easy to find all that information. That's kind of the core of our system.
Going back to, I know we were talking a lot about like using different languages and how you manage people using different languages. But another question was, how do you handle the situation when something breaks and there isn't coverage across a specific language? Like if somebody's out on PTO or something.
We have enough people who know SAS and R that we figured out. Part of that goes back to the documentation for this, because there should be a record that explains what this program. Well, you get the work product, you can track it back to this ID to the program. We have a standard header that goes in each program that's supposed to explain enough about that program that people should be able to work their way through it well enough. I really encourage, is a light way to put it, that people put comments in their program so that other people can read it. You should, in my group, if you write a program, you should think about writing a program to somebody else in the group. You're not writing a program to get something done. You're writing a program, yes, to get something done, but to get it done in a way where somebody else in the group can pick that up and understand what you're doing. So there's got to be comments in your program. And then we've got enough people who know SAS and R that we can figure it out for the most part. It's a risk, it's a challenge, but it hasn't been too bad because we do require some standards and documentation. And again, that's a pain in the neck. It takes time and investment, and you got to enforce people doing that. But the code audit helps with that as well. Part of the code audit is making sure that the program's clear enough and commented enough so people can understand it. Oh, Stephanie, if you want, Stephanie, you can send me an email or something. I can send you, actually wrote up kind of our process for doing that, the indexing of work products and stuff like that.
That'd be great to maybe share through our LinkedIn group too.
Sure. It's written for EPI groups, but yeah, you could share it.
Okay. I see, Mike, you had asked, has anyone developed our snippets and distributed them across a team?
Yeah,
we've get that. Could you try again?
Siri thought I was asking her that question.
We've got, in addition to having sort of the library of all our code, we've got some folders that have handy code snippets, and we just label them for, here's a good way to do this. Here's a good way to do that. So people can go in there and find useful approaches. And then the code itself is searchable.
Sorry, are those snippets actually within the RStudio IDE, or are they in a separate document?
They're separate. We just have a LAN file system with folders on it, and one of the folders is useful code and macros, something like that, and everybody knows you go there to look for some tips or to put tips.
I mean, I don't know if people are familiar with the snippets within the RStudio IDE, but they're super cool because you can set up template frameworks where as you pull in the snippet, it jumps you to, what's the next thing that you need to tailor for your own situation. It's essentially like a function, but it's more of a kind of open code.
Those are super helpful, Mike. I didn't even know they existed until like 6 months ago, and I was shocked when I found out about it, but super helpful. I have all kinds of snippets for myself and my team right now.
Yeah. They live in a specific place within your kind of, I think it's within app data or something. So it's not terribly easy to share them between people, but if you're in an organization where you can roll out an installation or configurations like that, then they're a really helpful thing to know about.
Okay,
I think
I'm gonna
it's a
admit
great-
I didn't know that either.
So if you're in the RStudio IDE, when you start typing a function name or something, you can use tab to autocomplete. But you basically give the little kind of template of code has its own little name. And so if you hit tab, it will auto-suggest, one of the things it will auto-suggest is either a function or a snippet. And then if you choose the snippet, then if it's like a ggplot framework, then it will say, you know, what's your data, what's the aesthetics, and it kind of just guides you through filling in the right information. And so, as I say, it's almost like a function, except that it's just helping you. It's a framework for writing your code.
Cool. I see Yan had asked a question to you, Mike, to share more on what you did with that. If you don't mind sharing, like maybe some helpful links or resource you used for it.
Yeah, I think Tatsu has just shared the
Okay.
code snippets
Cool.
article, which is great. I haven't used them in anger. I think that's, you know, I'd love to, and I'd love to share that more widely with, like, you know, folks I work with. I think the problem that I have is that sharing them out to other people is, you know, involves them having to save the right file in the right place, which is always problematic for anybody, it seems. But you can set up your own, which is the great thing.
Nice. Yeah, I was talking about that yesterday with someone around like data products as well. So like if you had a template like example R Markdown or Shiny app for something for your company and making it available for everyone to use.
Well, that's what a package is for, right?
Well, I think like thinking about like having it published somewhere that you could just go and pull the example app. Let me see if there are other questions that I didn't see on Slido yet. Oh, I see. Jen, you had asked a question in the chat too, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Jen.
It's good to see you. I was going to ask, what's the most important traits that you look for when you hire? And like, what questions do you ask to get that information?
Well, so when I hire, I'm not necessarily hiring a data scientist. I'm hiring an epidemiologist. And for an epidemiologist, I want somebody who, well, for a worker, I want somebody who's going to take initiative, who's going to be able to work independently or get to a point where they can work independently, who's got, you know, I don't know, there's not one. They're going to have to have good content knowledge. I would love to be able to have X-ray vision where I could see that they're kind of like you, Jen, where they've got this amazing data brain and they grok to this stuff and they understand, you know, they just sort of start to intuitively understand data structures and how to analyze stuff. But that's not necessarily essential. It's really more about people who are going to take initiative, be able to work independently, and have the right knowledge at least. I love people with experience, but usually we end up just hiring people out of school. So it's at least having sort of a basis of knowledge. And it's public health. So they got to have the love for public health. They've got to be invested in what we're trying to get done. They've got to have the mission.
How do you interview for that to know if someone is going to like take the initiative? And
we use a process called targeted selection that I picked up years ago. I used to work for Eli Lilly, the pharma company, and they gave me this training in this interview process. But you know, you lay out dimensions that are important, and then you have several different teams in different sessions ask about those dimensions. You have several people asking about each dimension in different separately, so you can combine. You can discuss afterwards. We make sure we ask for examples. We try to really nail people down to saying, tell me a specific situation where you've been challenged with this, and what did you do, and what was the result, as opposed to people saying, I really like doing this, I'm really good at that. You know, just abstract talking. We're trying to get people down to talking about really a lot of specifics. And it's hard, but it's I think probably the biggest tool I've used for making sure, seeing what people really have, is asking them for specific examples, and asking them, it's called the STAR format. But you tell me, what's a situation or task you had, what did you do about it, and what was the result? That illustrates your ability to whatever, your interest in taking initiative, or your investment in the mission of public health, whatever it might be.
Thanks, Joe.
Sure.
Just want to check from the chat too. If I had missed your question, feel free to just raise your hand on Zoom too. But one question I had for you, Joe, just based on a previous conversation, is we talked a bit about how like technical skills are important, but a lot of it is also learning how to partner with people as well. I was wondering if you could chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've worked with people who have amazing technical ability and just super great data brains, but at least in my field in epidemiology, it's all about producing information, and it's about producing relevant information. So you've got to understand the customer, you've got to understand their situation, and the better you understand where they're coming from, what they face day to day, the easier it is to add value to what they're doing by bringing data to bear. I really see my group at Marion County as a support group, as a service group. We're there to serve other people. Other people they know what their problems are. We need to draw those problems out and understand what those problems are, kind of put them into our data language, and then be able to apply data to those problems to get back to their issues. So that's the partnership. That's the understanding. You have to be really, the closer you are to the client, the better. We've got some programs that are really well funded. We can have one epi like spend most of their time on, say, HIV. We got Jen spends half, she used to, yeah. We got somebody who spends half of their time with the HIV, with an HIV program, so they can sit with those people and really understand their day-to-day work and what the issues they face, and see the opportunities to bring data to bear on that. So it's around really getting to know people, so then you can translate their needs into data needs, pull the data in, translate it, give it to them. And create
Cool,
systems
thank you.
where it's not just answering individual questions, but it's creating systems where day to day they can operate more effectively, because you've set a system up where they get the information they need as they need it each day.
Great, thank you. Well, I get to ask you more questions then if there aren't other questions from the audience. But I'm curious about your recent move to the Beaumont Foundation, and how you made that decision after moving into your leadership role with the county. And
there's two things going on. One is just the whole issue of equity and racism, and this being just a really cool project to try to help public health move along the pathway of addressing racism and equity more squarely. A lot of interest in integrating more equity-based practices and how we use data, what we do with data. But within public health, there's a lot of discussion of that, but we're still trying to figure out what it is. And this is an opportunity to put a lot of focus on figuring out what that might look like. And it's been a tremendous learning. I've had a tremendous amount of learning over the last several months working with people who are much more in the racial equity workspace and advocacy area to figure out what it might mean. And just, I always knew we need to be closer to the community than we were at Marion County. But the closer we were to the community, and again, this is getting back to understanding the customer and understanding what the needs are out there and being relevant. The closer we are to them, the more relevant we're going to be, the more valuable what we produce is going to be. And it's just been underscored in the last several months about how important it is to make the affected communities, the marginalized communities, partners in figuring out what the questions are and what the factors are you need to pull together in the information, in the data, to identify, to bring to the surface the issues like structural racism, how that's manifesting so that you can put a spotlight on that to try to bring about change, and have them help frame the results in a way that's going to make that change move, because they can frame the results in a really salient, impactful way, much more than I'm going to be able to as a old white guy working in an epi department looking at data can do without their engagement. So that was a lot of it, just this opportunity to be involved in something that I think is really, really important. And it's a platform where I can be a lot more involved in some of the national discussions that I was involved with at Marion County, but now I can have, that's more central to what I do.
That's amazing, Joe. Are there things that we can all do as a community as we bring things back to our own companies and think about the ways that we're all operating?
There's a lot we can do. It's really so much of what I'm recognizing more and more is the problem with race. Things that perpetuate racism and structural racism are that we don't talk about it, we ignore it, that we don't label it. And that's not okay, because that allows it to continue. If we really want to change what's happening, we need to talk about white privilege and about how, like, again, I'm in public health, so how a lot of the differences we see in statistics, rather than just presenting, okay, there's this difference in white, black in terms of its health outcomes, frame that in the context of, we've got 400 years of history where this group has been oppressed in many ways. We've had not just before, not just until the Civil War, but there's redlining, there's all sorts of, there's the implementation of like the whatever, World War II, the veterans benefits and such like that. There's a lot of stuff that just really left out these communities. Social Security, when Social Security was implemented, it excluded domestic workers and agricultural workers, which are white and black and all different colors, but most of them were different colors than white. And so the net effect of that was to oppress certain groups much more than other groups. So bringing that to the surface when we present results, to frame it in more context where people can see the structural racism, the effects of the structural racism, to push us toward thinking about how to address those issues. It's not just a woman lives in a house that has a lot of asthma triggers. It's, there's a lot of dust, there might be cockroaches, whatever. We can go in and we can intervene to improve that house or move her to a different house, and that helps her. But we need to get back to, why do we have people living in houses like that? We need to change the policies that are allowing these inequities to occur. And so it's trying to push back to more root causes of the issues that we're trying to deal with.
Definitely. And I know we're just hit the top of the hour, but I'd love to keep this conversation going if you have a few more minutes, Joe.
Yes, I do.
Okay, awesome. Angela, I see you had your hand raised too, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's such great conversation that you're having, Joe. I love to hear that kind of looking at the source of things. One of the many things that we analyze in R is our fish contaminant data. So Penobscot Nation has sustenance fishing rights reserved in treaties. And as you can imagine, many sources of pollution do not allow that to happen. Even when fish dams get taken out and fish come back up from the ocean, we're finding recent studies that we've done, we're finding they're even more contaminated than non-sea run fish. So those conversations about what is causing these problems are so critical. So I just really wanted to commend you for having that level of conversation.
Yeah, and I'm no expert in it. I'm just learning on this. And then again, nobody is. I mean, you got to give yourself some space and allow yourself to make mistakes, but we got to try in this area and figure it out. Take some risks.
Exactly. I think we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's not easy stuff and it's not going to be a simple conversation. So, but commend you for having it. It's really, really uncomfortable sometimes. So thanks for doing it.
No, it is for sure.
And on that topic too, of like getting getting comfortable with having these uncomfortable conversations. Do you have maybe some suggestions for us or tips of how we can approach this in our own organizations, or when we maybe see that something's happening? that shouldn't?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you got to speak up. You got to give yourself a little forgiveness for not always speaking up. But you got to take some risks and you got to push it. I don't have the answers. It's not an easy thing. And there's not a way to do it safely, really. I mean, there's always risk involved. So I don't know. You got to finding. I guess when I look at the folks who are really doing this a lot, they've got a large group around them of allies, of folks who are allies, is the wrong word in that context, but these are people who share the mission and can support each other as they go forward, because it's not easy work, and you need people who are supporting you.
One organization that I know of in the data world is the AI Inclusive org, from I think the founder of Our Ladies as well. But I'm curious if there's other similar organizations too that we could all share with each other. I just put that one into the chat.
Yeah, there's some really good work by the Mozilla Foundation around equity and community engagement that gets into equity. And I've spent the last several months just going over this whole area and doing a lot of research in it. So there's a lot of organizations. I don't have everything especially organized, but I might in a little while, if you ping me, like in a couple of weeks, I might have something that would be useful to share.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, Joe. I just want to make sure that I've heard everybody who had a question or wanted to jump in too. So I'll do another check to see if there's anything I've missed. I see Chris is sharing a link in the chat too. Thank you. I think it's so important that we continue to have conversations like this as well. And I know it kind of just came at the very end of the session here. So would love to dive deeper into this on future Hangouts too. But thank you so much, Joe. If people want to connect with you or have other questions, what's the best way to connect? LinkedIn or Twitter or?
No, it's email. I'm an old guy.
Okay.
Email is probably the best way. So I guess you can share my email. If people could try to make clear in the subject line what it's about, like maybe it's connected to the RStudio thing or something, so I can sort of segregate it off from my other email. Make sense of it.
Okay, great. I will. I'll share that with everyone too. But also share some of the links that were mentioned in the chat and tips on our LinkedIn group for the Hangout. So if someone from the RStudio team is on and wants to share that link there, or I can go and grab it real quick. Here, I'll put it into the chat. But every week after the Hangouts, I'll try and share every link that was mentioned or a few tips from the featured leader. But thank you so much for joining us, Joe, and sharing your experience with us.
Sure. Happy to do it. I'm glad you guys are out there. It's good to see groups getting together and learning from each other.
And thank you all for all the great questions too. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.